Hi, I'm Shanti, the artist behind Shanti Fine Arts. I'm going to show you today how I painted these orchids with wood beads, and I'm going to talk about art mistakes and how to. I'm starting off with blocking the petals of the orchid flowers, and what I'm doing is I'm mixing alizarin crimson with a little bit of unbleached titanium white for the pink areas, and for the little bit of the orange areas I'm adding to that pink a little bit of Indian yellow to get that orange effect. So varying the amount of crimson, alizarin crimson, white, unbleached titanium white, and Indian yellow. I'm getting the three or four different shades here that I'm blocking the orchid flowers with. Now that I have told you about blocking the flowers, let me first talk about the first and the most annoying mistake in this video is my head. Yes, you heard it, and you can see it obviously. In this beginning part of the video, I put the camera in such a way, and I wasn't even conscious about it, that my head is constantly coming in the way, and that is so annoying for a viewer. So obviously the camera angle did not work out, and every time you make a video for YouTube or whatever platform you want to show it onto, you have to be very careful about the camera angle. Make sure that it is working. Check onto it from time to time and make sure that it's actually the right angle. So that's the first mistake I wanted to talk about. Next, you can see me blocking the leaves of the orchid flower, and what I'm doing is I'm using mix of viridian green, sap green, white, and a little bit of blue here and there. And it doesn't have to be the exact colors. Also, some of the background I am putting, I'm thinking of putting in a rock in the background, like the orchid is growing on top of a rock. So for those areas, I'm using gray, which is like a mix of black and white, and added with a little bit of yellow, ochre, and brown. So like I was talking about just a second ago, that it is not important what color I'm using. It is more important to get the values correct, the lights and darks correct. So if you have enough contrast in between the lights and darks, then it will not matter if you have used the exact colors. And now on to the orchid flower, I am starting to add details. What I'm doing is I am using unbleached titanium white mixed with a little bit of titanium white, and adding the striations or the marks on the orchid flower. This is the first layer of detail that I will put on, and then I will let those details dry, and then I add additional layers of glazes on top of it to get to the right color. So what I'm doing is adding in this little streaks of lines on the orchid, just like my reference photo. And obviously I have to mention at this point that this reference photo is from Clough of Lachri. If you have not checked out our channel ever, then you must. She is to me, she's the undisputed queen of YouTube art videos. So I will put a link to her video or her channel in the video description for you to check out. This was not technically a reference photo that she shared. She was just sharing her own collection of orchids, and I asked her whether she would allow me to paint the orchids, and she was nice enough to allow me paint this. So yeah, the flowers are copied from her reference photo, but the reference photo was not taken for the sake of painting. So it was showing like a part of the wall and part of the window, and I really did not want it to be a part of the artwork, obviously for the aesthetic reasons. So I wanted to put a rock in the background and then kind of use some shadows and lights, and that's how I was planning to do it. But what happened is that when I was painting in the leaves, I got the perspective wrong. The leaf, the big one that you see in the front, it was in such an angle that it was not supposed to be in the front. It was actually kind of in the background. It was still looking big enough, and at the size wise I did it right, but the perspective was totally wrong, and that I realized probably almost at the very end of the painting. This is why while this painting or this artwork was done almost 6, 7, 8 months back, when I didn't even have a good quality camera. I never ever actually made a video out of it. I never shared it with anybody because I was kind of not happy with it because I made mistakes. But then I thought that is what I need to share to all the viewers, that art is not about all good things. Yes, the orchids worked out fine, but the leaves didn't. And in total, the artwork was not what I wanted it to be. It did not come out up to my expectation, but that always happens. That doesn't mean that you discard that artwork, you do not finish it. You always finish artwork because you learn from your mistakes. So that is what I wanted to share, and that's why I shared this video, this footage finally. And if nothing else, how I painted the orchid still remains valid. You can see that I'm still putting in the striation details. I would have loved to share the reference photo with you so that you could paint your own orchid flower as well. Although orchid flower reference photos are very easy to find. You will find tons and tons of them, almost similar to this one on Pixabay, which is an awesome site for quality, royalty-free reference photos. So check that out. Now I am going in between the white striations that I had initially created and using lines with purple and lines and dots. So some of the areas I'm using lines, some of the areas I'm using dots, and I'm kind of smudging them together to get the right feel. And I was really happy with the final results on the orchid, although the entire artwork was not up to my expectations, but the orchids worked wonderfully. So still adding more and more of those purple striations and dots. It would have been wonderful if I could zoom in and show you the exact amount of details or dots and striations I could put in. But this, as I told you, was an old camera which lacked that kind of a quality of video or zooming in capacity. So you still get a very good feel of what I'm doing, but I cannot show you the teeny tiny details, like how much dots I'm actually putting. But if you look at a reference photo of an orchid of this variety, you will understand how much dots is associated with the lines to go with and get the natural look. I think at this point it still looks pretty ugly, and that's not because I'm making any mistakes painting the orchid itself. It's because I am just building up my layers. I want this striations to be dark enough so that when all these dry and I put layers on top of it, with glazes on top of it with other colors, then they fade out a little bit, but they still show. You can see that I'm using very bright white highlights wherever they are necessary and going around the entire orchid, all of the orchid flowers, and repeating the same striations and then coming back with the bright white highlights. So alternating between the darks and lights is what I am doing currently. And I'm just hyping up the contrast tremendously at this point, because not only that I feel that hyping up the contrast makes very nice artworks, makes your painting pop because of that contrast, and but also because I'm going to add a lot of layers of glazes once these layers dry up. Like I said, I'm using oil paint for this particular painting, and for oil paint, if you want to glaze, one thing to remember is that you have to let this initial layer dry completely. Now I'm using liquid as my medium, so whatever I paint, it dries overnight so that I can start glazing the next day. But if you're used to painting with acrylics, that can be kind of a dampening thing, because you're used to it drying in a few minutes and then you add glazes. But that's how oil paints works. Even if, in case of liquid and similar other fast drying medium, it would still take 8 to 9 hours or overnight to for that layer to dry so that you can glaze on top of it. So I guess that is kind of a drawback, if you will, for oil paintings. What I do to counter that is, say if I'm done with the day's work and I cannot proceed any further without letting that layer dry, and I still have time to paint. That's why I always have 2 or 3 different paintings going side by side, so that when one I cannot work anymore, I can move on to the other one and not waste time, because I tend to work only a certain few days of the week, because that is how my schedule permits. I have a job, I have a home to take care of, I have a son who I have to take to different events and practices and all that stuff. So yeah, that's how I plan my week, and that's how I work. And not that it is of great importance as per the painting, but I just want to share it at this point, that I have always have 2 or 3 different paintings going on at this point, so that I don't waste time. And one of them, like if it is an oil painting, which I do quite often, so when that one layer is drying, paint is drying on one oil paint, I move on to the other paintings, whether oil or not. So that's one thing to think about. If you are thinking of doing oil painting and oil painting only, then you can have like 2 or 3 paintings working at the same time. So moving on to the roots of the plants, the orchid plants, and to me these was kind of a very satisfying part to paint. And the little striated roots. Now I'm adding a little bit color to the background. The background I kept really simple, like a mottled kind of effect. And if you are interested in how to paint a mottled background, I have a whole video for that. I will link that in the video description as well, so you can check that out, how to get the mottled effect. Although that one is done in acrylics, the same thing will work exactly the same way in oil paints as well. So adding a little bit of pop of color here and there. Um, this was a point where I realized the perspective of my leaf was wrong, and I almost, like, I got so fed up. I could have started that painting from scratch again, but that would have made me, kind of wipe out a couple of the orchid flowers and then do the entire leaf, which was doable, not that. But for the painting of this small scale, I did not want to go through that much of effort. Now you can see that I am using a very thin glaze of Indian yellow and crimson on top of the striations. Now you can see that why I created the striations so dark and so bright, like so much high pigmented purple and white, because I was going to come over with Indian yellow and crimson and create that dark and light effect. Once those glazes are being done, I'm adding some final white highlights to give those edges a little bit more pop. And when you're adding highlights at this point, it looks pretty bright and segregated at points. So take a smudging brush or a stiff round brush and smudge out those blobs of paint a little bit, so that it does not stand out so badly. Like it looks cohesive together, and not like as if you have created outlines. Outlines are not really a good way to create realistic painting, no matter what you're painting, flowers, animals, people. Outlines are not a good way in general. So you can see I'm creating striations and dots with the white, and that pretty much is the last part of the painting, clearing up the details. And once that is done, the painting will be done. I hope you learned a thing or two about painting orchids, and also about how to handle your mistakes and move on and get the painting going. So that was my target today. I hope if you liked what I showed you and what I shared with you, give me a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe so that you get a notification every time I post a new video. And also hit, or rather smash, that bell, because that is the way you get the notifications when I post a new video every week. Thank you.